Section 54 Sale Defined sale is a transfer of ownership in exchange for a price paid or promised or part paid and part promised. Sale how made. Such transfer, in the case of tangible immovable property of the value of 100 rupees and upwards, or in the case of a reversion or other intangible thing, can be made only by a registered instrument. In the case of tangible immovable property of a value less than 100 rupees, such transfer may be made either by a registered instrument or by delivery of the property. Delivery of tangible immovable property takes place when the seller places the buyer or such person as he directs in possession of the property. Contract for sale. A contract for the sale of immovable property is a contract that a sale of such property shall take place on terms settled between the parties. It does not, of itself, create any interest in or charge on such property. Here's a detailed elaboration of Section 54 of the Transfer of Property Act, 1882, breaking down its key components. 1. Definition of sale. Transfer of ownership. The essence of a sale is the complete transfer of ownership rights from the seller to the buyer. Consideration. The buyer must provide a price in exchange for the property. This price can be paid in full, promised to be paid later, or partially paid and partially promised. 2. Mode of sale. Property worth 100 rupees or more. Registration is mandatory. A written and registered instrument, such as a sale deed, must be executed. Property worth less than 100 rupees. Registration is optional. The sale can be made either by a registered instrument or by physical delivery of the property to the buyer. 3. Delivery of tangible immovable property occurs when the seller hands over physical possession of the property to the buyer or someone authorized by the buyer. 4. Contract for sale versus sale. Contract for sale. An agreement between parties to execute a sale in the future. Doesn't itself transfer ownership or create any interest in the property. Only creates a personal obligation for the seller to transfer ownership upon fulfilling agreed upon conditions. Sale. The actual transfer of ownership completed through a registered instrument or delivery of possession. Key points to remember. Registration of sale deeds is crucial for properties worth 100 rupees or more. Delivery of possession is essential for completing a sale, even if a registered instrument exists. A contract for sale is distinct from an actual sale and doesn't create property rights until a valid sale is completed. Essentials for a valid sale. Transfer of ownership. Consideration. Price. Agreement between parties. Writing and registration for property worth 100 rupees or more. Delivery of possession. Purpose of Section 54. To ensure clarity and enforceability of sale agreements. To create a record of property ownership. To safeguard the interests of both parties involved in property transactions. To prevent fraud and disputes arising from informal or undocumented transactions. Section 118 Exchange defined. When two persons mutually transfer the ownership of one thing for the ownership of another, neither thing or both things being money only, the transaction is called an exchange. A transfer of property in completion of an exchange can be made only in manner provided for the transfer of such property by sale. Here's an elaboration of Section 118 of the Transfer of Property Act, 1882, regarding exchanges. Definition of exchange. Mutual transfer of ownership. An exchange involves two parties reciprocally transferring ownership of their respective properties to each other. Consideration. Unlike a sale, where the consideration is money, the consideration in an exchange is another property. Neither of the properties involved can be solely money. Mode of transfer. Follows rules of sale. The transfer of property in an exchange must be completed in the same manner as a sale of that property. This means registration for properties worth 100 rupees or more. A written and registered instrument is mandatory. Delivery of possession. Physical possession of the properties must be exchanged between the parties. Key points to remember. Distinction from sale. exchange is differentiated from sale based on the nature of consideration, agreement, and registration. A valid exchange requires a clear agreement between the parties and proper registration if applicable. Tax implications. Exchanges may have different tax consequences than sales, so it's important to seek professional advice. Example: if person A owns a house and person B owns a plot of land, they can exchange these properties through an exchange transaction. The ownership of the house would transfer to person B, and the ownership of the plot of land would transfer to person A. Essentials for a valid exchange: mutual transfer of ownership, consideration in the form of another property, agreement between parties, writing and registration, if applicable, delivery of possession. Purpose of Section 118: to provide a legal framework for property exchanges, to ensure clarity and enforceability of exchange agreements, to protect the interests of both parties involved in exchange transactions, to prevent disputes arising from informal or undocumented exchanges.